What's going on, YouTube? We're back at it for another video, and today we've got the best ship modules you need to upgrade at the beginning while you're leveling. That's going to give you the best bang for your buck when it comes to improving your stratagem game as you're going through each one of these difficulties, getting into that harder content, or even just leveling in general. It could be even more efficient for you. And one thing I do need to say at the beginning is, depending on your playstyle, depending on who you play with, maybe you've got a group of buddies that every time you jump in here, you're playing with them, and each one of you's got your own little thing with each one of the stratagems. Somebody's more on the orbital side, someone loves the eagle, sentries, weapons, backpacks. Some of these things are going to just basically kind of give you that moment where you kind of need to hone into your sector of what your playstyle is, depending on that team composition, and going through whatever is going to be the min-maxed or whatever is the best route may not be the decision that you actually need to go for, and you just need to hone in on what you utilize the most. Need to put that at the beginning as, with each one of these videos that may say this is the best, these are the ones that are going to be the most efficient. It's not always about whatever is the best, it's about what's the most enjoyable for you. And I need to put that out there at the very beginning as no matter what, the number one thing that we're trying to get out of this game is just enjoyment and having a good time. And for the most part, a lot of times that's me just looking for whatever is going to give me the most efficiency, the most destructive nature, or the quickest way to just keep dropping that next payload or something. But for other people, anything that just improves those niche little moments or gives you that ability to just drop in the sentries and be that guy that's just got all the guns holding down one position or a mountaintop, and you've just mowing down everything with you and your sentries. I can definitely see it, and I can enjoy it myself. But at the same time, I'm firm standing with that eagle. But that being said, we've got a lot of things to cover, and the first thing that I would say everybody at the very beginning of the game should unlock is going to be donation access license. This is something that's actually going to benefit you way later into the very end game of the actual game when it comes to utilizing the railgun. This is going to give us an additional carryable magazine for each one of our weapons that we drop from the stratagems, which is going to be huge for us in the beginning, considering we only have, I believe, 2 magazines when it comes to the machine gun that we first get and the stalwart. So these are great for clearing power. They'll have the capability of giving us a little bit more crowd control and a little bit more damage in that early portion to help us with getting through those first missions. But by the end point, the number one thing that it's increasing is the railgun. Not 100% sure what the railgun had previous to having this upgrade on the ship. Be funny if it was 19 to 20, but after you have this upgraded, it will have 20 rounds in it, and this is something you're going to need fully every time that you're facing off with the automatons at higher difficulties, and later on it is going to be a huge benefit in facing off with the Terminid as well. But that being said, that's going to be the first one I would say everybody needs to just upgrade. If you haven't already upgraded this, it's going to be a huge benefit to you. And if you haven't used the railgun, do give it a try. It's a heavy hitter, and it's probably going to be one of the best stratagem guns that you'll handle throughout any portion of the game. It can hold its own, and arguably it's a part of the meta loadout, which we've got a couple of videos coming in the future, so hit that subscribe button. We've got plenty more of that Helldivers 2 content coming. You need more of that information, anything to give you that next edge and pushing into the next difficulty. We're going to be serving it up over here at the Radio Reaper Show. Coming up next, we have the hangar. These are arguably the upgrades you want to get as quickly as possible, as it is going to be the most beneficial when it comes to upgrading your stratagems, specifically the Eagle itself. Out of every one of the upgrades, this is arguably the most influential when it comes to the stratagems. This one is going to truly make that Eagle above par when it comes to facing off with every other stratagem, and how useful they can be, and how readily available they can be, and how many different times you can use it. It gets a little bit ridiculous at how much just this one section of upgrades to your ship is going to further increase your capability in harder difficulties to be able to just dish out as much damage as possible and even create a little bit more survivability for yourself. But starting off with liquid ventilated cockpit, we get a 50% reduction to our cooldown for our Eagle stratagems, which this is different to the cooldowns compared to that of the other stratagems we have. Like with the orbitals, as soon as you drop one in, immediately it starts to go on cooldown for X amount of time, say like 3 minutes, whereas with the Eagle stratagems, you may have noticed most of them have multiple uses. They'll have different charges with them. It is a spacecraft, jet, whatever you'd like to call it. It is a weapon of mass destruction, in my opinion, and it is beautiful in the sky to be able to call this thing down. But in between each one of those strikes is the cooldown period, which I've been in Helldiver difficulties for so long that I believe the original cooldown time was 16 seconds, as most of the time I see it on cooldown for 8 seconds for myself in Helldive difficulty, and I believe maybe that's with the 50% increase to cooldown time. These things will affect the time in between each strike, but reducing it down to 8 seconds, or if less, if I'm just mistaken right here, is even better, and it's just going to give you ample opportunity to either correct one of those moments where maybe the strike didn't hit the exact target or it didn't finish it off. You'll be able to quickly throw in another one, or possibly even with facing the bugs or even against the automatons. It gives you the readily availability to have another capability to either just board clear or give yourself some more breathing room, or just drop one of those single targets, crowd control, and just give you ease of access to moving to the next objective as easily as possible and dealing with whatever's in front of you as quickly as possible, and not having to wait on a long extended cooldown. Now, when it comes to the actual cooldown that is similar to that of the other stratagems, this is called rearming. You may have noticed this if you've had multiple of your Eagle stratagems, say with your 4 slots, you've put in 2, you've got the airstrikes, you've got the cluster bombs. You notice each one has its own individual charges, but you may have noticed at certain points where if you depleted the first one, it doesn't immediately go to rearm itself. It's going to sit there and wait for you to deplete the other Eagle stratagem until it actually goes back to your ship in order to restock itself with all the ordnance it needs to be able to utilize each one of those strikes for your stratagems. Now, with the pit crew hazard pay, we're going to cut this down by 20%, and this is going to make sure that no matter how many of the Eagle stratagems you have on you when you come into that match, every time it goes to rearm every single one of them, it is going to be a flat 2 minutes. Now, I wouldn't suggest that you come in and have 4 different Eagle stratagems. Generally, I come in with 2. Even just 1 is all you really need. Arguably, sometimes that can be the best composition for a solid loadout, as it's just going to give you one readily available stratagem that is going to be available every 2 minutes. And on top of the fact that it's every 2 minutes, you have multiple uses out of that stratagem. It isn't just a, oh, it went on cooldown for 2 minutes and now I have a one-time use. It's a multi-use that can be faceted for a multitude of different situations and different types of stratagems for different instances. It really becomes one of the most versatile stratagems, in my opinion. The orbitals come close, but they do not come close when it comes to the readily availability of the Eagle itself and how low that cooldown can be. It is quite unreal, but then it just gets even better. Now, you will need to get to extreme difficulty in order to unlock this last upgrade for the ship module. That is the lowest difficulty you can find. These super samples, the pink squares up there in the right, or the legendary samples effectively. But with expanded weapons bay, every single one of our Eagle stratagems has an additional use to it added on, which includes the 500 kilogram bomb. I have a love-hate relationship with this stratagem. It is, sometimes it hits, other times this is an aircraft coming in to sweep and drop in a payload. Even with the airstrikes, sometimes, that Eagle will come swooping by, and the next thing you know, it just plasters the side of the mountain right next to the ordnance and the little, choke point that you have, and it doesn't hit any of the targets that you wanted it to. And then other times it just completely decimates everything. It's beautiful, and then sometimes it's very painful. It's a frustrating one, but having the capability of having 2 of those 500 kilogram bombs and just 1 more of every other one of these Eagle strikes or Eagle stratagems, it is going to be unbelievably useful for you when it comes to pushing into those harder difficulties, or even if you're somebody that likes to play in a more lower difficulty, go into extreme, farm a little bit with some randoms. It won't be too hard to get a couple of those pinks out and then go back after you've gotten this upgrade, and you're going to be having a ton more fun, especially if you enjoy using those Eagle stratagems. It's going to be a good time, and I'd highly suggest going for that hangar upgrade as quickly as you possibly can if you're really trying to get some stratagems that are basically going to work around those modifiers and harder difficulties, or just give yourself something that is quickly available all the time. Even just 1 slot of this is going to be a huge benefit to you, as it's always going to be something that's quickly available for the next instance you may need it. Going forward after that, there is a bit of a fork in the road for some people Me personally, I decided to make the decision to go more in the route of upgrading my Sentry stratagems. This was something that I felt was more influential, as for whatever reason, the upgrades that work towards the orbital stratagems just really are very lackluster in my opinion, and there's arguably only 2 of them that are really beneficial to further increasing the capability of orbital stratagems. I hate to say that they're lacking behind because they do have a purpose. There are some of them that are very beneficial for you, but when it comes to the ship module upgrades, there's not a whole lot really benefiting each one of the orbital stratagems. So in my personal opinion, going to upgrade your Sentry stratagems within the engineering bay and the robotics workshop is going to be a much better payoff in the early portion of leveling than if you went straight for those orbital stratagems, as the ones that you really want that fully increase the capability of the orbital stratagems is actually going to be the last one available to you as you get into the harder difficulty. And arguably, I haven't even gotten it myself just yet, and it's still not even going to be that big of a deal once I actually get it. It's just going to shave off maybe 30 seconds here and there when it comes to being able to utilize some of those orbital stratagems. But we'll get to that here in a moment. Right now, the first thing I would go for when it comes to upgrading the engineering bay would be synthetic supplementation, as this is going to further reduce the cooldown time of the Sentry emplacement and resupply stratagem. That is one of the biggest things about this is it's not only for the Sentry and the emplacements, but it's also that resupply stratagem that we have unlimited use of each time that we're in each one of those matches, giving us the capability of having a 10% decrease to the amount of times we can refill our ammo, our stems, and our grenades. That is going to be extremely useful for us. You definitely want that as early on as possible, considering, is the more times you can drop that resupply, the better for you and your team. Now, going forward from that point, I would go with dynamic tracking. This is going to reduce the deployment time of all Sentry stratagems, and what that means is effectively there's this weird double up of timing when it comes to when you call in a stratagem. Effectively, what's realistically happening is on your destroyer, they're putting one of these sentries into a pod, loading it up, and then deploying it to the ground. And so this is going to make that a little bit faster. What it's going to do is just make that time a little bit reduced, which there is another one that reduces deployment time of some of these other stratagems that is actually a little bit more useless in my opinion. But moving from that point, I would say go for shock absorption gel. This is going to increase the amount of ammo that you have for all your Sentry stratagems by 50%. This is going to be extremely noticeable and really effective for you at just fully giving the capability of each one of these sentries to be able to have the clearing power and just amplifying the amount of damage that they can actually dish out. As the next thing you want to go for is advanced construction. Arguably, you don't have to go for this one immediately. I'd say if you're already in extreme difficulty, work towards getting high quality lubricant first, as this is going to make the sentries rotate quicker. And with something like the autocannon sentry, this is going to be a huge benefit to you, as some of them are extremely slow at turning and sometimes can end up getting killed faster just because they can't turn around quick enough to start landing shots on the target before they end up getting hit by a charge or a bile titan or something along those lines, which is the reason I don't go for advanced construction first, as this further increases the health of all these sentries by 50%. But I'm going to be real with you, that 50% is kind of noticeable when it comes to smaller bugs or some of arguably against automatons every time they're just shooting lasers. So no matter what's hitting them, that 50% is a little bit noticeable, more noticeable with the automatons, but 9 times out of 10, when they're getting hit and they're getting hit hard, they're generally going to get killed quickly, no matter whether or not they have an increase to that 50% of their health or not. It's a bit lackluster in certain moments, so do keep in mind when it comes to Sentry stratagems to kind of put them in a place where they're far away from some of the enemies, but give them enough visibility to get onto that target. And sometimes you may want to find that middle ground, especially with like Bile Titans or Chargers, especially Chargers, considering they can just bum rush over really quickly, run into it, regardless of that 50% increase to health, and it is a one-shot stampede moment. It can be really frustrating to have to wait that 2-minute cooldown time, and then next thing you know, you pop it out, and it's not dishing out any damage. It almost feels like a wasted stratagem moment. Sometimes they're amazing, and they can be really game changing, and then other times, man, it just feels like a waste. But moving forward from that point, this is one that I would say you don't have to get. I'd honestly just don't waste your time on this. The rapid launch system, I thought the biggest reason I went for this was it removes the deployment time for emplacement stratagems, which makes you think that as soon as you drop down the stratagem, it just like magically pops out with the shield or the Tesla tower. Effectively, it basically cuts down the time to where it acts as if this pod is already preloaded on the ship and it's just an immediate drop to the ground. So instead of being, I guess, 8 seconds, it's going to be a 4-second drop in. The only reason I even went for this was to just get the shield generator relay and hoping I could just instantly deploy it and then immediately have the capability of just dropping like orbital barrages or things like that as some type of play to just kind of like, you know, basically a bubble play, get everybody inside, maybe drop a sentry on the inside of it, and then just drop in barrages on top of us, thinking that maybe that'd be like a cool way to have this like holdout moment. That would be really good for like extraction at the end of Helldive, but it's not as cool as I thought it would be, and arguably it's still a crapshoot of a play. I still haven't really tried it out just yet, but I was really disappointed to find out that it was still a 4-second timer for this thing to drop in. And then if you end up having 100% increase to the call down time, that's a modifier for the harder difficulties. It still ends up being an 8-second drop, which is extremely frustrating. So I would arguably say just don't go for the rapid launch system unless you're just like die hard for using some of these anti-personnel minefields or the shield generator or Tesla tower. I'm going to be real, a lot of times I don't use this in harder difficulties. None of these stratagems are really that beneficial, minus the shield generator when coming against the automatons. The anti-personnel minefield has its uses in certain situations, but I find it to be a 50-50 situation where it can be counterintuitive to possibly end up getting you and your team killed more than it ends up killing the enemies. It's one of those moments, but besides that, it really is just, you don't even need this to make those useful effectively. That call-in time being cut down to just 4 seconds isn't as beneficial as you might think. Moving forward from that, I would argue that if you're somebody that utilizes, which are even I use, the support weapons and the backpacks quite often, you know, that shield backpack is a number one, and so is the railgun. I wouldn't argue that you have to have these, but if you want a little bit of a reduction to the cooldown time, you can go for streamlined request process and hand cards. This is only reducing it by 10%. This is why I have saved these for the last ship upgrades for myself, considering each one of these is an 8-minute cooldown. And when you're reducing this by 10%, you're only reducing it by about 42 seconds. So it's still going to be about 7 minutes and 12 seconds, or 7 minutes and 18 seconds. Yeah, there's the math get corrected. So it's still going to end up being roughly about the same amount of time. So it's not something you absolutely need to go for immediately. But if you're somebody that just wants that as quickly as possible, possibly wanting to duplicate multiple to give to other teammates, is a very fantastic play for some people, and it is one of the strongest arguments that I would say is going to make this even more useful, is if you can give multiple people that backpack, that shield upgrade, or giving them railguns while they're using more of their other stratagems for orbitals or eagles or sentries. It can be really beneficial in that way, especially if playing with randoms and you get that communication going, getting that synergy going between everybody's stratagems. These can be some of those game-changing moments, and maybe that 42-second cut down can be that beneficial, but at the same time, you still have to call this down. You still have to get them to go grab it. It's not going to be the most influential, in my opinion, as much as that donation access license. But moving on to the orbital stratagems upgrades, the orbital cannons. The first one is not bad, the exploding shrapnel, but it isn't exactly the most beneficial. A lot of times, I will tell you right now, I'm not a big fan of barrages. I don't think they're that useful, and I am quite surprised that there is not a ship upgrade that further tightens the accuracy of these barrages. I would much rather see this in the coming future. If any developers see this video, I would love for a ship upgrade that makes those barrages more tightened together with their accuracy, giving them a tighter yield and giving me the capability of utilizing something like the 120 millimeter or the 380 millimeter a bit more often and seeing a bit more come out of it rather than just hoping for the best when I toss that in and kind of feeling like I just wasted a stratagem slot on it. Because that's effectively what this is benefiting. The most that's going to benefit from this is the airburst strike and the precision strike. In my personal opinion, the exploding shrapnel is just further increasing the radius of the explosion. If you don't know, with this game, even with some of those 500 kilogram bombs, you may have noticed that it looks like that Bile Titan or that charger is like right next to that bomb and it's going off, and for some reason it doesn't instant kill. Well, that's because they just weren't close enough. It wasn't that it didn't do any damage, it just didn't do enough damage, and they were just far enough away to not have that full massive damage, as the center is going to give you every bit of what you want. But with exploding shrapnel, that will make the outer edges, the outer radius of that, a bit more influential when it comes to that overall damage, as the further it goes out from that center point of the explosion, the damage will continue to drop off in that direction, or in a circular radius around it. Moving on from that, we do have more guns, which is going to fire one additional salvo per barrage. And again, I'm not a big fan of barrages, and this is just not giving me everything that I want. Just one more barrage. I would rather see this tighten up the accuracy, just make this more accurate, closer to the target location that I have made the drop for this stratagem, instead of having one additional barrage out of this, considering most of the time, you know, one additional barrage isn't actually being as beneficial as you want. I'm still not 100% certain as to whether or not this is one of those moments like with orbital walking barrage. If it's firing 2 barrages each time that it's actually coming down, I know that it technically is, but it doesn't feel as though it is. And in those moments, it seems like it will be useful, but even then, the RNG on these barrages is just too far to be useful, in my opinion. But that's just me. You know, if you're somebody out there, you know, let me know down in the comments if you use barrages all the time and you're getting some success out of it. I would love to hear these stories. I just have no will inside of me to ever possibly use a barrage without just trying to make a meme build out of it when it comes to that bubble. But after that, 0G breach loading is probably the best that you can get for the orbitals, as this is going to further decrease the cooldown time by 10% for every single one of those orbitals. I can't tell you how huge that is, especially for like the orbital laser, orbital precision strike. You could get that going quite often. Airburst strike or smoke strike. Things like this are going to be extremely beneficial for you, having that cut down, especially the orbital laser is probably like the biggest one, because that's a 5-minute cooldown, and having that cut down by 30 seconds to 430, I mean, with as useful as the orbital laser is, reducing that by 30 seconds actually is something I would say is quite beneficial for you. Even though you only get 3 uses with that thing, I'm always on the fence with it, but every time that I use the orbital laser, it's worthwhile generally, unless I just wasted it myself, and that's just me being dumb and not knowing that there weren't enough enemies for me to utilize that for, or just not having enough communication with the team and finding out that, yeah, hey, it's an empty graveyard over there already, kind of wasting a stratagem. But that can just happen at any moment. But the very last things that I would say you'd want to upgrade come to the bridge, which targeting software upgrade, reducing the deployment time of orbital stratagems by 1 second isn't a bad one. I'd say you could probably knock this one out pretty quickly in the early portion. More than likely, you may have already upgraded this yourself, thinking it was pretty beneficial, but it's not. It's just 1 second. It seems like it'd be really great, but it's not. It's not game-changing, in my opinion. A lot of these orbitals aren't really... They're just not having everything affected in a much more meaningful way as pretty much everything else is. Like, the 10% cooldown is about the only thing that's truly amplifying the orbitals, in my opinion. And it's quite sad. I hate it, because I feel like they should be much more powerful. I really like them. and I really want them to be powerful, but they're gonna need something to benefit them before I can start just using them properly, in my opinion. But after that, we've got nuclear radar, which is just going to further increase the enemy ping radius on our mini-map by 50 meters. If you haven't noticed this before, anytime you open up your mini-map, you will have, I believe, I'm not sure how many meters away you can see the little red dots around you. This is perfect for those moments when you're in higher difficulty. You're trying to use a little bit of stealth, pick and choose some of your fights moving between objectives. This can be a really powerful play, especially if you're somebody that's playing solo. You're probably using this all the time. And in the case that if you're a solo player, I would say this is something you probably want to go for pretty quickly. This is going to be something that will benefit you in the long run. You're going to utilize this a lot more often than other people will. But for me personally, with the way the radar reacts to enemies right now, I feel perfectly comfortable with how far I can see. This will just be something that's a little bit of that icing on top of the cake for me by the time that I fully upgrade it. And then after that, the cherry on top, the power steering, which just improves the steering for Helldivers during a Hellpod deployment. Just gives you the capability of steering that Hellpod to either drop on one of those enemies or drop where you would like to drop a little bit easier. Would I say it's going to be perfect? It's not. It's just going to be something that gets a little bit of nuance, gives you a little bit of a benefit, but it's not something that is absolutely game-changing in my opinion. But guys, that's going to be the full breakdown on ship upgrades that are the best ones in slot, giving you a little bit of information on each one of them as well, giving you what is my breakdown on where I've gone with pushing into these upgrades and where I have failed, because I didn't go exactly in the route that I have described to you today, and I felt a bit lackluster in certain instances where it would have been more useful if I had already upgraded that hangar or some of those sentry upgrades. I would rather have spent that, especially that rapid deployment, man. I really wish I had spent that on something like Streamlined or the Zero Breach loading. I could have already had these already upgraded by this point, and it is a bit of a gut punch moment where you're just kind of like, man, I don't want to do anything but Helldive difficulty, and sometimes it's a bit hard to get out of Helldive difficulty. And you may have noticed recently, Helldive difficulty has been, or Extreme to Helldive difficulty has been increased in difficulty overall over this past weekend. If you haven't noticed that, it's getting a bit harder to survive out there, but I enjoy that. I enjoy them making it a little bit more difficult, and I like playing around with that challenge and feeling like I'm constantly having something to work towards and get better at. It's just a good time, the whole experience of it. But hopefully you're having the same in your journeys through the Helldiver excursions, and hopefully this has helped you out in some way to give you a better understanding on which direction you should go when it comes to ship upgrades. Hopefully it wasn't too much talking. You know, I definitely have more videos coming in the future that'll probably be a little bit less in detail. I will be segmenting out each one of the stratagem categories, or at least when it comes to the differences between the orbitals, the eagles, and the sentries, and some of the weapons as well. But not all the weapons, considering there's some that I just feel are garbage. But we'll get that information out there for you, so that way you're not wasting some of this currency. I know there's a lot of people out there that just don't have as much time as I have to fully stack out everything, and that's why some of these videos are important to get out there, is to give you the information you need to find what's going to be the best playstyle for you when it comes to unlocking some of these with the minimal time that you may have. The best thing about Helldivers is that you really only need a few hours a week, if anything, to truly get the most enjoyment out of this game. But as you progress through time, you know, working towards something just makes it even more of an enjoyable experience. And when you do get those unlocks, it just makes it all the better when it comes to each one of those runs that you have between each one of these missions. But that being said, hopefully you've enjoyed this. Hopefully it's helped you out. If you'd like to see more of this content, hit that subscribe button. If you'd like to see some of this content live, hit that link down in the description. Follow me over at Twitch. We will be streaming daily, and have a good one.